Hello, good afternoon everybody, and welcome to this event, Getting Ready to Teach T-Level Technical Qualification in Accounting Core Component. This afternoon we're going to have a look at the core component, as we say here, for accounting, and this is what we've got in store for you this afternoon. Firstly, we're going to have a look at the overview of the specification and just have a look at how the specification works and what's included in the specification itself. Now, before the event, you should be able to download a copy of the specification. You've been given two downloaded materials, the specification and a copy of the PowerPoint slides. You might find the specification useful at different times because we are going to look at course programming, and we also are going to discuss some generic teaching and learning ideas for the core content. So you might find that that's useful to be able to use and to do. So it is there for you, or at least it's there for you later on in terms of the different content information that we talk about today. You can look at that at your own leisure. Once we've looked at the overall of the specification, we'll also plan the program itself and start talking about, rather than planning it obviously together, start talking about the things that you've got in mind in terms of planning your program, because I'm sure if you're beginning to think of starting this in the autumn, you've started to think about the different different aspects of this qualification that you need to deliver, and also starting to think about the different aspects of how you're going to deliver them and what order you're going to do them. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Again, I'm going to give you some time to think and reflect and hopefully share your ideas with the other delegates in the room to be able to share with them your ideas in terms of what you've got planned, but also to come up with any points in terms of the things that you may still need to know before you start delivering your program. We'll then look at, as I said, teaching and learning ideas for the core content. So generic ideas in terms of, teaching and learning ideas that tend to work. Also, though, however, things that you might need to think about with this qualification as it's slightly different to others that you may be currently delivering, because you've obviously got to think about the core component, the optional specialist components, and also the industry placement, and integrate all of those together and thinking about teaching and learning ideas that would be useful in that way. We're then going to move on and look at the external assessment just very briefly. So just so that when you walk away today, you've got an idea of the external assessment. And once you've gone through the process of your learners completing their program within 2 years, what you're looking to help them and support them in undertaking, so that you can think about in teaching and learning and program planning the things that you need to consider in terms of external assessment. Finally, it's an opportunity for you to ask for information about anything that you want to ask about. Please do be aware, though, this is quite a new qualification. I do have a colleague who's joining the event just in the background who will be taking a note of any questions that are unanswered today. So if there is anything that I can't answer, that we'll take this away and try and find out the answers from Pearson for you, and we will come back to you at a later date. I'd much rather than tell you what I think is the case, to go away and find out exactly from Pearson the exact answer and tell you that in a couple of days' time, than for me to kind of guess and give you an overview, a sort of generic answer. So whilst we're going through this session today, the focus of today, it does say accounting, but much of the core component content is exactly the same. And all the concepts that we're talking about the same are exactly the same in terms of finance. So if you're running both or you are running for finance, please don't worry. I will be pointing out when we talk about the different aspects of the core component, what is different between the accounting program and the finance program, so that you have a little bit more information there. So if you are doing finance, don't worry, please. You're not in the wrong place. We will be looking at the core component which covers content for both. Now, this event is designed to be a second event in the suite that Pearson are offering for the T levels. The first stage, as it were, are a set of pre-recorded events that you will be able to find on the website if you haven't listened to those already. Now, they go through in a bit more detail the specification, so again, you to understand how the specification works, what's involved, in a bit more detail for the core components and also the optional specialisms for both finance and accounting. I'm just putting into the group chat now I'm just going to submit a link to those so that you can access those later on at your leisure if you haven't listened to them already, just so that you've got a bit more of a background and more information that you can refer back to later on. So that will be arriving into your chat. When it does arrive, please do put that maybe copy and paste that link so that you can have a look at it later if you haven't listened to those already. Okay, so without further ado, we're going to get going and we're going to start talking about the planning your programme. Okay, and I'm just going to give you a little bit of an overview about the programmes themselves so that we're all on the same sort of playing field, we're all at the same starting point. So as we said, this is focusing on the slide on accounting, but please do not worry, I will be talking about finance as well. Okay, so the T-level in accounting and also the T-level in finance includes the technical qualification and an industry placement, as I'm sure you're aware. The requirement for maths and English at GCSE and level 2 functional skills that was previously planned into this programme has now been removed. So that's from the past, that's now been removed from the programme. And there is also no need for additional specialist qualifications to be completed with this T-level. So what is involved in the T-level in accounting and of course indeed the finance? Well, first of all, it's made up of, as I've referenced already today, a core component and one occupational specialism. Now, the core component in the main is common across accounting and finance. There are some slight differences to that, some anomalies, and I will be pointing those out to you later on this afternoon. Now, the core component covers the underpinning knowledge, concepts and skills that support threshold competence in the accountancy or finance industry. And it has 500 guided learning hours and is assessed through 2 externally set core examinations and an employer set project. Now, if we talk about occupational specialisms, in accounting there is one occupational specialist component in this technical qualification, and this is 600 guided learning hours. Now, students undertaking the T-level qualification in accounting will complete the one occupational specialism component, which is an assistant accountant occupational specialism. In terms of finance, there are actually 4 occupational specialist components in this technical qualification, and each of those are again 600 guided learning hours. Students undertaking the T-level technical qualification in finance will choose one single specialism, and those occupational specialist components are retail and commercial banking analyst, investment banking and asset and wealth management analyst, insurance practitioner, and finance compliance and risk analyst. And as I said, they will choose just one of those specialisms and focus on those in the finance qualification. Now, students undertaking the T-level qualification in finance and accounting will, in finance, I should say, will be able to choose from one of the 4 occupational specialisms as part of their T-level technical qualification, as I've said. And students also on both the T-level technical qualification in accounting and finance will need to complete 350-hour industrial placement related to the occupational specialism selected by the student. This is not something that Pearson is involved in. Guidance from the Department of Education states that the industry placement must last a minimum of 315 hours. That's approximately 45 days, but can last longer. Employers can offer industry placements as a block, as day release, and a mix of these, and a part of the placement can be shared with another employer if necessary. So that's some important information there when you're starting to think about your planning your program and the delivery of the core component, is the fact that you will need to then work with employers to consider when they are going to undertake their industry placements. Is it going to be a block of 45 days completely? Altogether, are they going to go on day release, or is there going to be a mixture of those? And that has implications for your program planning, obviously. Now, providers and employers are expected to work together when planning the industry placement, and when planning the program, each of the factors that we've talked about are important to consider. Okay, so just some information then about guided learning hours and total qualification time. The technical qualification specification is divided into the core component and the occupational specialist component. The TQT, the total qualification time, and the GHL, the guided learning hours for this qualification, and the two components are shown on the slide. The total qualification time for the T-level technical qualification in accounting and in finance both have a TQT value of 1,310. The core component has a TQT value of 610, and the occupational specialist component has a TQT value of 700. In terms of guided learning hours, then the technical qualifications have a guided learning hours of 1,100, the core component has a guided learning hours of 500, and the occupational specialist component has guided learning hour value of 600. Now, what's the difference between guided learning hours and TQT, which are the total qualification time, which is a question that is commonly asked? Well, guided learning hours refers to the amount of time that you are guiding learners within the classroom. And as well as this guided learning, there may be other required learning that is directed by tutors and assessors. This includes, for example, private study, preparation for assessment, undertaking assessment when not under supervision, such as preparatory work, revision and independent research. TQT and GLH are assigned after consultation with users of the qualification. Okay, so now I'm going to give you some time to have a pause, to have a think about your programme of delivery and what things that you're considering in terms of sequencing. Now, you may all be at slightly different stages here, and I'm going to ask you to consider 4 key things. You may have your plan already, programme in place, but some of the things we may discuss may make you reflect on that or consolidate the fact that actually the plan that you've got in place is exactly the right one. You may also not be at the starting process of planning, and therefore this is a good opportunity to start to think and reflect on what things are important in the planning programme and what things you need to do to put this in place. Okay, so what I'm going to ask you to do is I'm going to ask you to consider the 4 questions that are on the slide. So first of all, how would you sequence the programme? So what we mean by that is, first of all, what are you thinking of doing in terms of your industry placement? Is it going to be in a block? Is it going to be day release? Is that going to take place in the first year or the second year? Or is it going to be spread across both? Also, how are you going to handle the delivery of the core component and the optional specialist component? Are you going to run them side by side? Are you going to start the core first and then do the specialist afterwards, and then stagger the introduction of the occupational specialism component when you feel confident your learners are ready to start and get going? Now, secondly, what I want you to consider is how would you plan for staff specialisms? So you need to consider your specialisms of your staff, who has the finance and accounting specialisms, who has the general business information, that there is some within the core components, and how you would factor that in. And also, how would you plan for assessment? Now, just to make you aware, the final assessment for this programme is undertaken at the end of their second year. So, of course, that is a set block at the end of the second year. But what we need for plan for assessment is what assessments maybe you may do as you go along. How are you going to put your programme together to maybe give them opportunities for mock assessments, etc. And then finally, what other further information do you feel you need to be able to plan your programme? Okay, so what information do you need? Is there further information that you need either from us or things that you maybe need to do within your centre, within your programme teams, to be able to actually start and put a plan for a programme in place, particularly if you're starting for September. So I'm going to pause my mic. I am here in the background, and I'll check for questions and things in the moment, and Q&A at the same time as you're doing this activity. If you do have any good ideas or any questions, you can either put your questions into the Q&A blocks, or you could put them with your ideas, your plans for your programme into the group chat. It is a really good opportunity for using the group chat facility here to share ideas and network and share good practice. You might pick up something from somebody else and they might pick up something from you. So if I can ask you to think about your ideas there, and then maybe put some of your thoughts and reflections into the group chat, and I'll be back with you in a few moments' time and we can review your ideas and thoughts, and I'll share with you some thoughts that we've collated. Okay, so over to you for a little while. Okay, thanks for your comments. Sorry, I didn't leave there because the group was showing up, so I had to leave and come back to you. I can see that Mark has shared with you the links to the recorded events and also events as well. So I've been able to copy and paste that if not there, if you have the links to them already. Okay, so I'm just going to run through your comments and then sort of feedbacks and some points from us. I mean, there is some consensus, and as always, there are some differences, isn't there? The questions around the placement, the really is, maybe day release might be preferable. There's, very made is, accountants practices as highlighted by Deborah, thank you, that might find that actually would be less willing to do that. So I think it's worth, before considering and setting in stone your industry practices, your industry, consider the types of practices that you're going to get them to go to an industry that you're using. Okay, some comments regarding the sound now. Okay, so hopefully we can get that to improve. Bear with me one moment, see if we can get that to improve for you. Okay, I'm hoping that might make the sound a little bit better. Please do let me know if it doesn't. And hopefully it will improve. And there, it's obviously since I've had to leave the session and come back. So please do let me know whether you can hear me any better, and I will start again saying what I was just trying to say when you couldn't. Okay, so thank you for letting me know that it sounds better. Brilliant. Okay, so what I was saying was, is there's some discussion around the industry placements and the fact that some of the industry placements that they may go into may be more open to day release rather than others. So workplace environments may be better. An industry might be better for workplaces, whereas, accountancy practices may prefer them to come into blocks. So it may be worthwhile, just considering that before you start planning your program and start thinking about the links with the employers of when learners need to go, because you may need some flexibility within that. Okay, so yeah, industry induction for a number of weeks to get them going before you send them out and start getting them going. Looking at the optional specialism in the second year, a number of people said start with the core and then moving to the optional, which sounds quite sensible. What you do need to be aware of, and I have said it already today, but I want to say it and stress it again, is assessment in this program is linear. And that means that assessment will take place at the end of the second year. So the assessment will take place at the end of the second year, either for some of the exam-based aspects of it on set dates or in a set windows set by person. I will mention those later on when I talk about assessment. But there is a number of us that are talking about, doing assessment before the end of the program. And that isn't possible on the T levels in accountancy and finance. It is linear qualification. Now, I would say to back that up, of course, is that your learners will be best placed at the end of their programs to understand the content and have the experience and the skills that they've developed within their placements to be able to undertake assessments. And that's why it's designed to be a linear type of program. Okay, so just moving through any of the other comments. Yeah, I agree with you, Paul and Sally, in the fact that that we will probably need to do some reading up around some of the content, and we're going to spend a little bit of time, not enough, anywhere near enough, because we've only got an hour and a half this afternoon, having a look at the core content and having some time just to delve into that, because there are aspects of it that, you know, I as a practitioner in the business sector would have to spend some time either reading up on or look to a colleague to be able to deliver that aspect. I think, Sally, your point is a good one, in the fact that there are some areas in terms of the planning that you may wish to either rely on their employers and their placements to help them with, if they are willing to, or get specialist outside speakers to come in and work with them and explain and work with them on that content, because there is some aspects of it that is very specific to these industries. And not all of us have worked in accountancy, not all of us have worked in the four finance occupational specialism roles. So you will need to be aware of that. Like I said, we are going to talk about teaching and learning later, but it is one of the things that needs to be kind of pointed out. So thank you for your comments there. In terms of that then, just moving forward to some of the points we wanted to raise, one was around assessment, the fact that assessment takes place at the end of the 2 years, but also throughout those 2 years programmes, you are going to want to get them to undertake some actual formative assessment so that learners can actually practice some questions and answers and some of the things that they're going to be required to do in the exam papers, or, you know, even in their employer set project. So it is important to, as though they've got to do the final one at the end, the actual one that counts to their qualification, allowing them to have access to mock assessments and practice assessments throughout. It's also important to give them a range of different sectors in your teaching and learning, but also different types of business settings that they will be working in when we're delivering some of the key content. And we've mentioned actually an example of that already, in the fact that, you know, somebody undertaking the accountancy programme might actually find that their experience of working in an accountancy firm may be different to working in an accountant in an industry-based setting. So just bearing in mind that, you know, you may need to think about the placements that your learners are going in and giving them different examples and planning in different things in your programme planning to give them an opportunity to access to each of those. In terms of it as well, what you probably will also want to consider, and I'm sure you have already, is your learners' starting points, their prior learning. So generally at level 3 within our sector, we tend to have some young people that have different experiences of our subject area. So we take, you know, the core content and the core component first of all, the general business stuff. You know, you may have learners within your programs that have undertaken and studied business previously, but you may have ones that actually haven't actually studied it at all. So you also obviously need to bear that in mind. And again, in terms of the occupational specialisms, particularly obviously on the finance programme, you're going to need to think about the 4 different specialist optional areas, and, you know, consider whether you are going to, you know, only offer one of those for your learners or offer all 4. And again, that gives implications in terms of prior learning, because they may have learned different things while they're out working with their employer, and also in their vocational specialisms. Okay, so that's all around programme planning. Unless anybody's got any questions, I'll just pause for a moment and see if anybody wants to put anything into the Q&A box. Hopefully, my sound has improved into Abraham things that it has. But feel free to please put your questions in if you do have any further questions. Okay, can't see anything arriving immediately. So what I shall do is I shall move on then to move on and have a look at resourcing for the programme. Now, bearing in mind that there are 4 aspects of the programme really that we need to consider resourcing, okay, and therefore we need to consider what resources we software. Now, in terms of specialist equipment, and there aren't any required for the delivery of the core or occupational specialist components. There is anything really that we say that you must have in terms of piece of equipment. You would benefit, of course, from good IT suites and learners having access to that on a regular basis, and just the normal office software. You may find that, there may be some maybe finance or accounting software that you're finding that, learners are experiencing and coming across when they go into their industry placements that you may want to add and adapt to give them experience of, sort of that as well. But really the only, thing that they really would benefit from is access to IT and office software. Now, we've already talked about teachers and about our experiences, in any sort of industry. We tend to find people come in with different experiences, but I do think that, business tends to be quite a broad church in the fact that, some of us may come from an economics background and some from a finance and some from a HR program. So we need to consider our qualifications, our experiences in the business sector, and also, consider that experience they have, but preferably, having somebody with some accountancy experience or financial sector background and experience in industry would be really beneficial. But I do appreciate that, that's not always easy to be able to find across your staffing. In terms of teaching, it's ideal that teaching would be shared across the curriculum team, so that together you will have the experience and knowledge that spans as much breadth of the qualification content and as much experience of teaching and teaching to external assessments as possible. I think most of us now, from vocational backgrounds, have experience of teaching to external assessments, but not all of us might necessarily teach those aspects of the programme. So it is important, as we were saying earlier, in programme planning, to consider and think about your staff and think about where the backgrounds come from in terms of their specialisms, in terms of content, their experience in industry, but also their experience in preparing learners for external assessments, and trying to bring that all together to try and help in terms of planning your programme, put a programme together that best supports our learners, as well as, of course, meets the expectations and the qualifications of our members of our team. Okay, so we're going to spend a little bit of time now getting to know the core content, okay, and getting to know that in a bit more detail. We're not going to have enough time, obviously, to go through every aspect of the core content, because for those of you who have seen the specification, which I imagine is quite a lot of you, you will see that it is quite lengthy, and it is in places quite broad. There's quite a lot that needs to be covered from a lot of different aspects in the core component, from indeed business and finance and accounting. Okay, so here is a summary of some of the core content, okay, core component content, and the key sections within the specification. And then it's also going to give me an opportunity to look at how the specification is laid out and what that's trying to tell us and direct us towards. Okay, so there are actually 13 core content areas or elements in the T level for accounting. And in the finance T level, there's actually 14 core content areas. And don't worry, I'm not forgotten the other 13 and 14. They're on the following slide and are there for a reason. So we'll come to those in a moment. Now, the core content really covers the underpinning knowledge and understanding of concepts, including theories and principles for both accounting and finance occupations, and included in these following different areas. Okay, so you can see there through 1 to 12, there's quite a range there, starting with business environment, as you probably would expect it to, into careers, regulation, professional and ethics, and equality, diversity and inclusion, security and risk, professional services, fundamentals of laws, fundamental of financial accounting, technology, data-driven innovation, research skills, and project change management administration. Now, you're probably, first of all, thinking about some of those, wondering what they involve. We are going to spend a little bit of time looking at specification and talking about teaching and learning ideas. So if you've looked at one of them thinking, no idea what that might include, then there's an opportunity in the worthwhile to be able to look at that. But also, I'm sure that you will be looking at some of those thinking as a teacher. I feel comfortable in some of those environments. In terms of those different content areas, but in some of those different elements, I might not feel quite as comfortable. Now, the core component content in the main is common across both qualifications, although there is slight variations in each element to differentiate the two pathways. And I'm going to go through those now and try and go through them slowly so that if you are doing the different pathways within accounting or finance, you can maybe make a note if something is slightly different from the generic we're talking about today, but you will see that in the specifications, of course, themselves. So let me give you some examples. So in element 1, business environment, in 1.1.2, contribution of finance businesses, or contribution of accounting businesses are listed. So there, the difference is that it's a contribution of finance business and a contribution of accounting businesses, and it's split slightly differently. So that element of the common sort of core component is different. In element 2, careers within the accounting and finance profession, they follow the same pattern, of course, but as each other, but they are tailored, of course, to finance professions or accounting professions as appropriate. So there will be content that is similar, but there will be things that are different within that. Okay. In terms of element 3, okay, regulation. Okay, in the accounting qualification, if you've been in the accounting qualification, you might want to make a note that the role of professional bodies is added into the accounting profession bodies. Okay, element 4 is broadly the same, just with different contexts. So different contexts in finance, different contexts in accounting. Element 5, security and risk, content's the same for each, but there is some additional content areas of threats to compliance and fraud prevention strategy as an additional content area for accounting. So again, very much similar, but there's some additional stuff in the accounting T-level. Okay. In element 6, professional services. Again, very much the same, but there's a need for internal service level agreements to be added into the content area for accounting. So just make sure that you've got the accounting qualification and realise that is an additional thing. Element 7, it's simple, it's the same for both, so that makes life easy. In element 8, in accounting, fundamentals of accounting 1, they're mostly the same, but there is some slight difference in the elements of financial accounts and the types of financial data. It's just some very sort of limited brief differences there, but needs to be pointed out so we're talking about the right one in the right context. In element 9, technology is exactly the same for both, so again, nice and simple. Element 10 is very, very similar, but there are some slight content differences here, just to apply it to different contexts. And also in element 11, research skills, again, almost the same, but there is some slight differences to account for the need to present accounts to an audience, to do that slightly different ways. And then finally in element 12, project change management administration. This is the same, but again, with the accounting qualification, there's the addition of barriers to change. Okay, so there is quite a lot included there, and like I said, in a little while, we're going to spend a little bit of time looking at content, considering teaching learning ideas on areas of challenge, not just for them, but I assume for us as well. But just that sort of overview of the core content that is very, very much the same from 1 to 12, but just be aware of those slight differences that I've highlighted. Of course, those slight differences, I suppose, only applies if you're offering both. Okay, now the final elements of the core component content is slightly different depending on the qualification being delivered. So in accounting, the final one, we said there was 13 in accounting. The final core component element is fundamental of financial accounting 2. Bear in mind that there was fundamentals of financial accounting 1, that was element 8, which included both. In finance, as we know, there's 14 content elements. Number 13, financial services sector. And number 14 is professionalism and ethics too. So again, extending the core competent component content that is common across both. So extending the element 4 further. Okay, so that just gives you a brief overview of each one and the core component involved. Okay, now I'm just going to discuss kind of how the core component content shows in the specification and what this is telling us really as practitioners. So we really see, as we said, either the 13 or the 14 key core component elements listed. So the one here, for example, is element 1, the business environment, and that acts as a title. And then within each one of those, the content in that element is then subdivided into sub-elements. And these sub-elements expand on the title to show the areas that you need to teach. So, the overall kind of business environment is the element overall title, and then the sub-elements tell us exactly what we've got to include. So, for example, here we've got 1.1. Fundamentals and principles of business and how they are applied. We've got 1.2 and we've got 1.6. And each of those therefore direct us to the types of things that we need to teach within the elements that we're delivering. And each of the elements, as you move through the specification, has all of these listed. Now, the size of the element and the number of some elements will vary from elements to elements. So there might be slightly different numbers and size of the element from, for example, element 1 to element 4. And there might be slight differences between finance and accounting. The size of each of the elements depends on how much your students need to know from that topic area. And so as a rough guide, if the sub-element is longer, when we're planning our schemes of learning, we will then be thinking about, well, that we will need longer time to be able to deliver that area, and therefore allow more time for maybe assessment as well. So as a rule of thumb, the number of some elements in an element indicate how much time you should be spending on that element and how much time you need to allocate to each one in your scheme of learning. However, I'm sure we all recognise that actually there are some topic areas that actually are much more challenging than others, and therefore might make the learners, your students might need more time to be able to learn and understand those. So we'll need to also factor that into our programme planning and our sort of element delivery. Okay, so hopefully that's clear about the component and the elements and the sub-elements. Okay, so each sub-element highlighted is then expanded to give the breadth and depth of the knowledge required with bullets and subtitles. So we have the overall element, which is the overall heading, then we have the sub-elements, which are the topics that need to be taught, and then within the sub-element we have information on the depth and breadth that needs to be covered. So for example, from the one on slide, we have the sub-element here, 1.5, the role of government in controlling and directing the economy. And we can see that then it's expanded further and divided into the bullet points 1.5.1, 1.5.2, 1.5.3, and so on. And that gives us more information of what we need to include. So, for example, in 1.5.1, it tells us that we need to know, we need to deliver and the learners need to know about government economic policies, including control of inflation, economic growth, employment, and the promotion of international trade. Okay, now some of those bullet points will just be one bullet point with a list. Some of them may actually have further sub-bullet points at the bottom, like 1.5.4, for example, where public sector organisational structure and culture is divided into the role of the public sector in delivering services, and public accountancy, public administration, and public management services. So that gives us a little bit more detail in terms of how much we should be teaching and the depth of the teaching. Okay, so do the bullets under each element need to be covered, or are these just suggestions? The bullets are the information on the breadth and the depth, so they should be covered. Of course, when they're asked in the assessment, they might not be covered at all, but just like in a traditional A-level specification, there's a list of things that you need to make sure are covered so that learners know that. I hope that's that question. Okay, so moving on then to talk about core component content. Okay, the sub-element is what we call the rider statement, and the rider sits above the expanded content and is the title of what to come, or how it affects and needs to be applied to the expanded content. So, for example, here in the sub-element, we see here in 1.3 the responsibilities of corporate governance within an organisation, and as 10.3 principles of data analytics and its use to support decision making in accounting professions. That's the rider statement. That's telling us what needs to be included. Or we can see the example in 1.3, the responsibilities of corporate governance within an organisation. That's the title, the bullets that sit underneath it give an expansion of that title and show what to teach about the responsibilities in corporate. Okay, so all in the example of 10.3, principles of data analytics and use of support of decision-making in accounting professions, the example we've got here, that's expanded to see 10.3.1 and the sub-bullet points under it to show the principles of data analytics and what the methods and tools are. But the rider also requires its use to support decision-making. So as a teacher, you need to apply this requirement to the expanded content to show the students how the decisions are made from the data. So what we're ultimately saying is it tells you the content that you need to make sure that you cover and the learners understand, but also the rider might also tell you what the learners have to do with that. And the rider here says that it requires them to use its use in support decision making. So as well as covering the information that is included, you also need to cover how that is used to support decision making. Hopefully I've made that clear. If not, then please do come back to me with questions. Okay, so the final thing really then around course content before we get into having a look at the teaching and learning ideas and the specification itself is just a little bit around complementary content areas. So when you're teaching the core, and it might take you a little while you're getting through this qualification to do this, but it's a good idea to keep in mind. And if you do find areas of complementary content areas to do this from the beginning, it's good practice to look for areas of content that complement each other. For example, the areas linked together, but are in different content areas when teaching and learning activities can draw the concepts together. So we all know that when we start teaching a specification, particularly from the first time, we tend to, as teachers, start right from the beginning with element 1.1, and start moving down through it. But what we might find is when we get further through the content, that actually something that we've already covered previously earlier on either helps them understand what they're learning later on, or they complement each other. So it is quite useful to try and identify those complementary content areas so that learners will see that within the classroom and therefore be able to apply that when they go out into the workplace, because of course that's how we work in the workplace. We don't just see content of a specification individually. A business person or somebody working in accountancy and finance would see it as the whole. So for example here, 1.2.6 introduces the influence of legislative frameworks on organisation structures. Topic 4.5.2 references specific acts that business needs to comply with, and 7.1.2 extends these areas that business law covers. So there is complementary content there in the fact that there's the influence of the frameworks, there's then the specific acts that businesses need to comply, and then it looks at the areas that business law covers, so it goes into the nitty-gritty. So as such, the three topic areas can be linked for delivery, and students will gain a better understanding of theories as they can see how they're put together in practice. Although I'm not unrealistic to realise that probably the first time that you start teaching things, you'll be getting your head around the content and how it links together. So you may actually retrospectively, once you get later on through the specification, realise it links to something else and can do that as a reflective reminder. So, for example, when you're completing teaching and any activities related to legal frameworks, take this example, you could introduce students to the different pieces of legislation that impact on a business, topic 1.2.6, and then consider those pieces of legislation in depth, looking at the content of the topics 4.5.2 and 7.2. And there are many areas and specifications where topics are complementary and approaches to this in similar states. But as I said, it may take you a little bit of time to get your head around the content and understand where the content is complementary, especially if you've got more than one teacher, of course, teaching different elements. If a rider statement states understand, then that could be assessed through a range of different question types, from an explanation through to an evaluation. So just bear in mind, if the rider comment just says in understand, that doesn't necessarily mean they just need to understand it and recount it. They may be asked to, in terms of the question types in their assessment, go from anywhere from explaining it to evaluating it. So again, adding that into thinking of teaching delivery, and for example, going back to the legal frameworks, explaining a law and its implications for a business would be one question asked, but then they could actually be asked to evaluate the impact that has on business, and indeed maybe the impact on the business's practices. It also should be remembered that the subject knowledge from all of 13 and 14 subject areas can be assessed in both examinations and also employer-set projects. Okay. And we'll look at those a little bit later on, but also personnel planning and getting ready to assess event, which will look at the two exam papers in a little bit more detail. So please just do bear in mind, it isn't like some other qualifications where you can say, okay, elements 4 to 7 are in this paper. The whole elements can be assessed within any of the two exam papers or the set project. Hopefully I can make that clear. Okay, so let me just go through the questions that we have. Okay, so do one of the bullet answers to all the bullets into each one have to be covered. So answer that. Are the complementary contents identified in the specification? My understanding is not, which doesn't make it easy to be able to find them. Okay, Penny, I will answer you directly in a few minutes when we go into an activity and send the link directly to you. So please don't worry, I will send it to you directly. Okay, so if we've got no further questions around that, and hopefully that is made a little bit more sense of the specification, what I'm now going to ask you to do is I'm going to ask you to have a look at teaching the core component. Okay, and ask you to have a look at looking at teaching the core component and thinking about teaching and learning ideas. So what I'd like you this time to consider, and again, if you could put your ideas into the group chat, that'd be really useful because I think it was really beneficial sharing things before, is do you have a look, first of all, have a look at the content. Now, I'm not expecting you to be able to go through 13 or 14 core component elements, but maybe just cast your eye over them, see which bit they involve, or you might want to just focus on one area that you're particularly interested in, either teaching because you feel confident with, or maybe found out about learning a little bit more about. What I'd like you to do is think about any good teaching and learning ideas, either generically or for a specific aspect of the core component that you would like to share. Think about how will you use formative assessment, okay? What type of things could you do at different intervals? Bearing in mind, as we said already, a number of times this programme is linear, so the assessment will come at the end of the second year. And what aspects of the core content may learners find challenging? You might want to add into that elements that you might find challenging as a teacher. And some of us have already identified that there are some of those, although not named them, and there's no need to. So I'm going to give you again a few minutes to reflect. If you could put your reflections and comments into the group chat, that would be really useful. I'm here in the background if you've got any further questions for me, and I can see another couple have popped up, so I'll work through those while you're having a look. So again, over to you for a little while to familiarise yourself with the core component contents and have a think about your answers to the questions and your reflections into the chat. Hi, hopefully I'm back. Can you let me know if you can hear me? Okay, hopefully you can hear me again. Thank you for your contribution, etc. Thank you, Annie. Unfortunately, I had to refresh my computer and it then wouldn't let me back in. So I had to go and find another computer, try two internet connections, all of that. So thank you. I can see that you've made lots of brilliant comments about the content. And I think the collective idea is that, there's a lot of practice that you need to get your head around, etc. Okay, so I'm just going to get us through the remainder of the event. Apologies if the sound is different in and out, but I'm a little bit worried about leaving again and not being able to get back in again. Okay, so I'm just going to try and endeavour to kind of hopefully be able to hear me and get through it. Okay, so there are some resources that are online. Okay, the resources online are in the web page for the qualifications, and there are actually some new resources being put on there, PowerPoint presentations, etc., which you might find. So did I mention briefly the form of external assessment? So we've got the core assessments, 1 and paper 2. Okay. These are 4.5 hours each, worth of third course. They're both 90 marks each, and they're grade A to E. Some section A and section B, and there's a range of short, medium, and calculation extended response questions. And as I've said already, these need to be done at the end of the course. It's a linear course, and they must pass them to pass the course overall. Now, there's also, as you know, this employer setting project, and this is for third aspect of qualification, so it's worth a third application, and if they do fail this, then they'll have to sit again, and it's made up of 5 tasks, and is set within a particular window that Pearson sets, again at the end of the course, in the summer of their second year. Now, if you want to find out more about external assessment, as I said, we are running external assessment events. As I've said already, there are a number of things on the website, and I believe that there are more things coming through. The material is there. It's not there yet, I should say, sorry, but it's coming soon. For the core employer step projects and occupational specialism projects. And there will be some additional sample materials, as resources on there, which are all PowerPoints for some of the key aspects of the programme, and things like examiners' reports when exams have been sat will be available, but of course we will have to here go through the remainder of the programme. If you want to contact us, this is the way to do so, because it will cut us off. I hope you found at least some of it useful. Sorry about the IT problems, the delivery of your programme.